What if the last goodbye comes before the truth ever does? Not in a quiet hospital room, not surrounded by forgiveness, but behind reinforced doors, fluorescent lights, and the echo of keys sliding across concrete floors. What if the final chapter of a family tragedy doesn't end with answers, but with silence? That's the question hanging in the air right now. Because according to multiple reports, Rob Reiner's family is bracing itself for something they never thought they'd face this way. A goodbye that feels rushed, unfinished, heavy. A goodbye happening not at home, not in peace, but inside a prison infirmary where time moves differently and hope drains faster than anyone wants to admit. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Nick Reiner, once the son who lived quietly in the guest house, is now described as being in critical condition after a violent incident behind bars. And the words being whispered are chilling. He won't make it. Pause on that for a moment. Not because of what it means for him, but because of what it forces the rest of the family to confront. When someone is dying, people don't just think about the present. They rewind. They replay. They relive every warning sign they ignored, every argument they postponed, every truth they buried under the excuse of, we'll deal with it later. But later doesn't exist anymore. And here's the uncomfortable truth no one likes to talk about. When a case like this reaches the point of no return, the story stops being about guilt or innocence. It becomes about legacy, about what survives, about who is left holding the weight of what was never said out loud. Ask yourself this. If tomorrow was guaranteed to be too late, what would you say today? Now imagine trying to answer that question while cameras wait outside, headlines speculate, and your family name becomes a magnet for judgment, rumor, and endless opinion. That's the position the Reiner family is in right now. Publicly, people see fragments, short statements, carefully worded phrases, cold facts, dates, ages, locations, words like homicide and charged and suspect. Privately, it's something else entirely. It's a family that has been living inside a storm for months. One tragedy stacked on top of another, now being told that the storm may be ending in the most brutal way possible. Not with clarity, but with finality. Let's rewind for a second. Before the prison, before the headlines, before the silence became unbearable, Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were found dead inside their Brentwood estate. A home worth millions. A place that, to the outside world, symbolized stability, success, and decades of carefully built legacy. Inside that home, something went terribly wrong. The cause of death was later described in stark, clinical language. Multiple sharp force injuries. Homicide. Those words alone changed everything. Because suddenly, the story was no longer about mourning parents. It became about suspects. About timelines. About who was where and who wasn't. Nick Reiner, their son, was arrested that same night. And just like that, the family was split into roles no one ever volunteers for. The accused. The accuser, the silent observer, the sibling caught in the middle, and now the goodbye. But here's where things become even more unsettling. Because according to reports, it was Romy Reiner, the daughter, who allegedly told police about a dangerous family member. Words that don't just implicate. They echo. They linger. They don't disappear just because time passes. Imagine being the person who speaks up. Now imagine living with the consequences of that decision every single day afterward. That's the emotional terrain this story sits on. And it's not neat. It's not cinematic. It's not something that wraps itself up cleanly in a courtroom verdict. It's messy. It's human. And it's brutal. Fast forward to now. Nick Reiner is reportedly in critical condition after being stabbed in prison. Details are limited, conflicting, carefully controlled. Some say the injuries are severe. Some say the damage is irreversible. Some say the family has been told to prepare. Prepare for what? That's the word that changes everything. Because preparation isn't about hope. It's about acceptance. And once acceptance enters the room, the questions shift. Not what happened, but what do we do now? Who visits? Who stays away? Who speaks? Who stays silent? And maybe the hardest question of all, what if the person who held the answers is about to take them to the grave? This is where the story stops being about a case and becomes about people. Romy Reiner, who once raised alarms, now finds herself facing the possibility that the brother she warned others about may never get the chance to explain himself. Tracy Reiner, who has said very little publicly, now carries a silence that feels heavier than any statement ever could. Jake Reiner, who has remained distant, now stands at a crossroads that doesn't care about distance anymore. And looming over all of it is the absence of Rob and Michelle. Parents who will never weigh in, never clarify, never confirm or deny the narratives being built around their children. That absence is the loudest presence in this entire story. Here's something most people don't realize until it's too late. When families fracture under trauma, everyone remembers a different version of the same event. One person remembers fear. Another remembers warning signs. Another remembers denial. And none of them are lying. They're just incomplete. Now add the pressure of time running out. What happens when a family reunion isn't about healing, but about closure? What happens when apologies may come too late? Or not at all? What happens when the person the world wants answers from can barely speak? This isn't just a goodbye. It's a reckoning. And the reason this story matters right now is because we're watching the final act unfold in real time, without knowing how it ends. There are no prepared statements for moments like this. No PR playbook for grief layered on top of suspicion. No guide for what to say when your family's name becomes synonymous with tragedy. And yet, decisions are being made. Visits requested. Requests denied. Messages allegedly passed through intermediaries. And somewhere inside a prison facility, a man who has been defined for months by a single accusation may be facing his last hours defined by something else entirely. Regret, fear, or defiance. Which one is it? That's the question no one can answer yet. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous. Because when someone knows the end may be near, they don't always seek forgiveness. Sometimes they seek control. Sometimes they seek to reshape the story one last time. Sometimes they say nothing at all and let everyone else fight over the meaning. So ask yourself this, honestly. If Nick Reiner doesn't survive, who gets to decide what his story was? The police? The media? The family members who spoke up? Or the ones who stayed quiet? That question is about to tear everything open. Because according to people close to the situation, the family was recently given information that changed how they viewed the next 24 hours. Not a guarantee, not a timeline, but a warning. And warnings have a way of forcing people into rooms they avoided for years. But what happened next? The call that came in, the decision that followed, and the message that allegedly changed everything would set this story on a path no one was prepared for. And that's where things truly begin. What if the warning wasn't the scariest part? What if the scariest part was what came after it? Because according to people close to the situation, the first call didn't end the night. It opened it. The warning came in measured words. Calm. Professional. The kind of voice that doesn't panic, even when the message itself is devastating. Nick Reiner had been injured. The situation was serious. The family should be prepared for rapid changes. Prepared. That word again. It's the word doctors use when they don't want to say final, but they also don't want to lie. The call ended. Phones went quiet. Rooms filled with that hollow silence where no one knows what to say first. And for a brief moment, some part of the family reportedly held on to hope. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that says, maybe this is exaggerated. Maybe he'll stabilize. Maybe tomorrow will bring clarity. Then the second call came, and everything shifted. This one didn't sound the same. Different tone. Different urgency. Fewer pauses. According to sources, the message was short. The injuries were more severe than initially believed. Complications were setting in. Time mattered now. That's when panic replaced denial. Imagine being on the receiving end of that call. Your mind racing ahead of your body. Your hands shaking while you're trying to listen. Trying to process medical language you never wanted to learn. And here's the part that's hard to grasp unless you've lived it. When someone is in custody, nothing happens quickly. Not visits. Not information. Not clarity. Everything has to be approved. Who can come? Who can speak? Who can see him? Suddenly, this wasn't just a family emergency. It was a logistical nightmare wrapped in emotional chaos. According to people familiar with the situation, the first reaction wasn't unity. It was fragmentation. One family member allegedly wanted to go immediately. Another hesitated. Another reportedly asked a question that stopped everyone cold. Do we even know what really happened yet? That question matters more than it sounds. Because it reveals something uncomfortable. Even in moments of crisis, unresolved doubt doesn't disappear. It gets louder. For months, the family had been living with competing narratives, competing memories, competing versions of who Nick was and who he wasn't. To some, he was dangerous. To others, troubled. To others, misunderstood. And now, with his life possibly slipping away, those labels felt heavier than ever. According to reports, Rob Reiner was one of the first to respond to the call. Her reaction, described by sources as controlled but shaken, reportedly carried the weight of someone who had been bracing for impact long before this night. Ask yourself this. What does it feel like when the thing you feared most finally arrives? Is it shock? Or is it confirmation? For Romy, the emotions were allegedly layered. Fear, yes, but also something else. A quiet, terrible awareness that this moment would redefine everything that came before it. Tracy Reiner's reaction, according to people close to her, was different. Not outward panic. Not visible collapse. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't mean indifference. It means containment. Holding something back because letting it out would break everything around you. And then there was Jake Reiner. The one who wasn't there. The one whose distance had already become part of the story. When the call reached him, sources say it landed like a blow he hadn't prepared for. Not because he didn't care, but because distance gives you the illusion of control. And this call shattered that illusion instantly. Distance doesn't protect you when time runs out. Now here's where things start to get complicated. Because as the family scrambled to understand what was happening, conflicting information began to surface almost immediately. One source said Nick was conscious. Another said he was drifting in and out. One report suggested internal injuries. Another emphasized infection risk. Nothing lined up perfectly. And when information doesn't line up, suspicion fills the gaps. Was the initial report downplayed? Were officials trying to control panic? Or was the situation evolving faster than anyone expected? These aren't just questions for investigators. They're questions that families ask when they feel powerless. Because powerlessness is the true enemy here. You can't rush into a prison infirmary the way you rush into an emergency room. You can't demand updates. You can't sit by the bedside unless permission is granted. Everything goes through channels. And channels move slowly. According to sources, the family was told that if they wanted to see Nick, they would need to act fast. But even then, there were no guarantees. Think about that. Your family member may be dying. And the answer you're given is maybe. That's when emotions turn sharp. One source claims that a disagreement broke out almost immediately about who should be allowed to see him first, if anyone at all. Because this wasn't just about love. It was about history. It was about unresolved anger, unanswered accusations, and words that could never be taken back. Some allegedly believed that seeing him was necessary. A final chance to understand. To listen. To say something, anything, that might ease the weight of the past. Others reportedly questioned whether it was safe. Not physically, emotionally. What happens if he speaks? What happens if he doesn't? What happens if what he says changes everything? That fear, the fear of what someone might say when they have nothing left to lose, is powerful. And it may explain why this moment was delayed longer than anyone expected. According to insiders, as the family debated, another update arrived. This one carried a phrase no one wanted to hear. Time is critical. That phrase collapses arguments instantly. Because suddenly, the window closes. There's no time to resolve decades of tension. No time to decide what's fair. No time to weigh emotional risk. There is only now. And now doesn't wait. Here's something most people don't realize about moments like this. Crisis doesn't bring clarity. It magnifies whatever already existed. If there was trust, it deepens. If there was resentment, it sharpens. If there was silence, it becomes unbearable. For this family, silence had been building for months. And now, it was suffocating. According to reports, arrangements were finally initiated. Requests submitted. Permissions sought. But as that process began, something unexpected happened. Another call came in. Not from medical staff. From someone else. Someone connected to the incident inside the prison. And this call didn't focus on injuries. It focused on circumstances. According to sources, this person raised questions about how the incident unfolded. About who was nearby. About what wasn't initially mentioned in the first report. Nothing definitive. Nothing provable. But enough to change the tone of the night entirely. Because now, the family wasn't just dealing with loss. They were dealing with uncertainty layered on top of uncertainty. What if the story they were being told wasn't complete? What if key details were missing? What if this wasn't just a random act of violence? These thoughts don't come from nowhere. They come from patterns. And patterns had already haunted this family. The original case had been riddled with questions, timelines that felt off, decisions that felt rushed, statements that raised eyebrows. So when this new incident occurred, the mind naturally went back there. Back to the beginning. Back to the night Rob and Michelle were found. Back to the moment everything fractured. And now, with Nick potentially nearing the end of his life, those unanswered questions felt heavier than ever. According to one source, someone in the family asked a question that stopped the room. If he dies, does the truth die with him? No one answered, because no one knew. And that's the cruel irony of timing. When clarity finally feels urgent, it often arrives too late. As the night stretched on, emotions reportedly swung wildly. Hope, despair, anger, guilt. At one point, sources say, a family member allegedly broke down, not over the injuries, but over something much older. A memory. A moment when something felt off, but no one acted. That's how trauma works. It drags the past into the present and demands payment. And just when it seemed like the night couldn't get heavier, another development emerged. This one came quietly, almost as an aside. According to insiders, Nick had allegedly asked for something. Not medical, not legal, personal. The request wasn't immediately granted. In fact, it sparked another round of debate, because granting it would mean opening a door that had been shut for a very long time, and refusing it might mean losing the chance forever. What was the request? Who was it for? And why did it divide the family even more deeply than before? That decision, whether to honor it or ignore it, would set off a chain of events no one could stop. Because once that door opened, there would be no closing it again. And what happened next would force the family into a confrontation they had avoided since the very beginning. One that would redefine loyalty, guilt, and the meaning of goodbye. What if the truth isn't hidden, but rationed? Because once the family agreed, reluctantly, to consider Nick's request, a new reality set in. Not one shaped by emotion, but by protocol, by rules, by a system designed to control information first and address people second. And inside that system, nothing is ever as simple as it sounds. The prison didn't offer a narrative. It offered fragments. A timestamp, a location, a short description that avoided specifics. The incident occurred during a routine movement. The injuries were serious. Medical intervention was underway. That was it. No names. No explanation of how. No explanation of why. And if you've ever dealt with institutions, you know exactly what that means. You're being told only what you're allowed to know. Here's the contradiction that immediately surfaced. If the injuries were severe enough to prompt urgent family notification, why did the official language sound so restrained? Why did it read like a template? According to sources familiar with the process, this isn't unusual. Early reports are intentionally narrow. They protect the institution from speculation, from liability, from headlines spiraling out of control before internal reviews even begin. But that protection comes at a cost. Because when you limit details, you invite suspicion. And suspicion filled the silence fast. Within hours, multiple versions of the incident were circulating, quietly, unofficially, through channels that never appear in press releases. One version suggested Nick was attacked without warning. Another implied a confrontation escalated. A third hinted that he may have been targeted. None were confirmed. All were damaging. And the family was left in the middle, trying to piece together a reality from half-formed sentences and cautious phone calls. Ask yourself this. If someone you love is critically injured, do you want the truth or reassurance? The system offered neither. Instead, it offered waiting. Waiting for medical updates. Waiting for clearance. Waiting for answers that never arrived on schedule. According to insiders, the family was told that Nick had been moved to a medical unit equipped for trauma care. That alone raised questions. Not all facilities have the same capabilities. Transfers take time. Transfers mean severity. But even that detail came with conditions. No visitation until approval. No direct communication. No guarantees. And then came the language that changed everything again. Condition, guarded. That phrase is deceptively calm. It doesn't say stable. It doesn't say improving. It doesn't say critical. It says uncertain. And uncertainty is where narratives grow wild. Behind closed doors, the family reportedly pressed. According to protocol, visitation during critical medical events is discretionary. Administrators weigh safety, medical necessity, and security. But discretion leaves room for interpretation. And interpretation leaves room for bias. Some sources claim that initial requests were met with hesitation. Not outright denial, but delays. Requests for additional verification. Requests for justification. Justification, as if grief needs a reason. This is the moment where emotion collides head-on with bureaucracy. The family wasn't asking for special treatment. They were asking for time. And time was slipping away. At one point, according to insiders, someone suggested that a mediated communication might be possible. A message passed through staff. A brief exchange. But even that option was uncertain. Because there was concern about what might be said. Concern about statements that could complicate ongoing investigations. Concern about liability. That concern tells you something important. It suggests that words still mattered. That what Nick might say, even now, was considered powerful. Ask yourself why. Why would the system be cautious about final words? Because final words can contradict official narratives. They can introduce doubt. They can reopen cases people want closed. And that possibility made everyone nervous. As the family waited, another update arrived. This one was quieter, more clinical. Nick's condition had worsened. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, incrementally. But incremental decline in trauma cases often means one thing. The body is struggling to keep up. That's when the emotional tone shifted again. Hope thinned. Urgency sharpened. According to sources, discussions turned toward contingency, toward what might happen if the worst occurred. Who would be notified? What statements would be released? What information would be shared? And what would be withheld? Those conversations feel cold, but they're unavoidable. And they add another layer of grief. Planning for absence while the person is still alive. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, rumors began to leak. Not official ones. Whispers. Mentions of a stabbing. Speculation about motives. Assumptions about retaliation. The family saw these whispers and felt the familiar sting of narrative slipping out of their control. Once a story escapes, it doesn't come back intact. And inside the prison, the walls stayed quiet. No press briefing. No timeline. No confirmation beyond what had already been said. According to insiders, the lack of transparency wasn't accidental. It was procedural. Incidents involving high-profile inmates trigger layers of review. Legal teams advise caution. Administrators restrict information flow. All understandable. All devastating when you're waiting for answers. At some point during the night, the family reportedly received confirmation that limited visitation might be approved under strict conditions. Short duration. Supervision present. No recording. No discussion of the incident. No discussion. That condition hit hard. Because it meant that if this was truly a goodbye, it would be a controlled one. No explanations. No confessions. No clearing the air. Just presence. And presence, while powerful, can also be painfully insufficient. As plans were tentatively arranged, another contradiction surfaced. A medical professional reportedly indicated that Nick's responsiveness had improved slightly. Not enough to declare progress, but enough to complicate decisions. If he's improving, do we wait? If we wait, do we lose the chance? This is the torture of limbo. And limbo is where families fracture. Some argued to go immediately. Others argued to wait for clarity. And hovering over all of it was the unresolved question from the night before. The request Nick had made. The one that hadn't yet been answered. Because granting that request would require trust. Trust in a person whose credibility had been publicly dismantled. But denying it could mean carrying regret forever. And that's when someone reportedly asked the most dangerous question of all. What if he's trying to control the story? That question didn't accuse. It destabilized. Because it forced everyone to confront the possibility that even now, even at the edge, narrative was still a weapon. Was this a moment of truth or a final manipulation? No one knew. And without knowing, every decision felt wrong. As dawn approached, the institution finally confirmed a narrow window. A chance. Limited. Conditional. Unrepeatable. The family had to decide who would go and who would stay behind. That decision, who would step into that room under those conditions, would reshape relationships forever. Because whoever went would carry whatever happened next. And whatever happened next would not stay contained. Because the moment that door opened, the story would change. And what happened inside that room, what was said, what wasn't, and who heard it, would echo far beyond prison walls. What happens when the person who warned everyone is the same person who now has to say goodbye? Because when the narrow window for visitation was finally confirmed, the question wasn't just who could go. It was who should. And for Rob Reiner, that question cut deeper than anyone else in the room. She wasn't just a sister. She was the one whose earlier words had changed the direction of everything. The one who had raised concerns. The one who had used language that still echoed in every conversation that followed. Dangerous. That word had followed her for months. Some people treated it like courage. Others treated it like betrayal. And now, with time collapsing in on itself, that word felt heavier than ever. Because if Romy went into that room, she wouldn't just be visiting her brother. She would be facing the living embodiment of a choice she made when everything was already falling apart. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine carrying the knowledge that your voice helped trigger a chain of events you can never undo. And now standing at the edge of a final encounter with the person most affected by it. Do you speak? Do you listen? Do you apologize? Do you hold your ground? There's no script for that moment. According to people close to the family, Romy didn't rush to decide. She didn't argue loudly. She didn't storm out or demand her place. She went quiet. And that quiet scared people more than anger ever could. Because silence, in moments like this, usually means one thing. Someone is bracing themselves. As discussions continued about logistics and approvals, Romy reportedly stepped away. Not to avoid the situation, but to think. And thinking was dangerous. Because thinking meant revisiting the past. It meant replaying conversations she had with Nick long before police were involved. Long before statements were written. Long before words like suspect and homicide entered their family vocabulary. According to sources, those memories weren't clean. They were messy. Fragmented. Full of moments that made sense only in hindsight. A strange comment here. A shift in tone there. An argument that ended without resolution. The kind of moments people dismiss at the time, until they can't anymore. Here's the contradiction Romy reportedly struggled with most. She had spoken up to protect others. But in doing so, she had permanently altered how her brother would be seen. Not just by authorities, by the world. And now, the world might never hear his version of anything at all. Ask yourself this. If you believe you did the right thing, but the outcome is irreversible, does that certainty survive? Or does it crack under the weight of consequence? According to insiders, Romy's hesitation wasn't about fear for herself. It was about fear of what she might feel afterward. Because once you see someone in that condition, once you hear their voice, or realize you won't hear it again, you can't return to who you were before. That's a one-way door. And Romy knew it. Meanwhile, pressure built quietly around her. Not overt pressure. Not accusations. Subtle expectations. She had been vocal before. People assumed she would be vocal now. That she would want to confront him. That she would want answers. But wanting answers and being ready to hear them are two very different things. According to one source, someone close to the family asked Romy a question that landed like a blow. What if he says you were wrong? Not angrily. Not defensively. Just as a possibility. That question stayed with her. Because if Nick denied everything, if he challenged her account, her warnings, her interpretation, what would that mean? Would it invalidate her fear? Her instinct? Her decision to speak up? Or would it simply add another layer of confusion to a story already drowning in it? This is the emotional trap Romy found herself in. She wasn't choosing between love and loyalty. She was choosing between two versions of herself. The one who acted, and the one who now had to live with it. According to reports, Romy eventually made a decision, but not the one everyone expected. She didn't immediately volunteer to go in first. She asked a different question. Who else is going? That question mattered, because it wasn't about avoidance. It was about context. Romy reportedly understood that whatever happened inside that room wouldn't exist in isolation. It would ripple outward. It would be interpreted, reinterpreted, and possibly weaponized. If she went alone, Her account would carry enormous weight and enormous scrutiny. If she went with someone else, responsibility would be shared. Witnesses matter. And that awareness tells you something important about Romy. She wasn't just thinking emotionally. She was thinking strategically, which, to some people, felt unsettling. Why think strategically at a time like this? Because for months, her words had already been dissected, doubted, and debated. She knew exactly what happens when narratives aren't protected. They get twisted. As discussions continued, another layer of complexity emerged. According to insiders, there were concerns about how Romy's presence might affect Nick's condition. Stress, emotional spikes, unpredictable reactions. Medical staff reportedly cautioned that heightened emotional exchanges could worsen his state. That caution landed heavily, because it implied something painful, that Romy's presence might not be healing, that it might be destabilizing. Imagine being told that the very thing you hope to offer, closure, honesty, understanding, could actually cause harm. That's a brutal position to be placed in. And yet, Romy didn't react defensively. She listened. She asked questions. She weighed the consequences. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about whether this goodbye would help anyone, including Nick. According to sources, she asked one more question that revealed everything about where her head was. If I don't go, will I regret it for the rest of my life? No one answered, because no one could. Regret doesn't announce itself in advance. It creeps in later, when it's too late to fix. As the minutes ticked by, the visitation window narrowed. Decisions had to be finalized. That's when a new piece of information entered the conversation. Nick, according to staff, had reportedly asked again. Not generally. Specifically, he had asked whether Romy would come. That detail changed the emotional temperature instantly, because now, the decision wasn't abstract. It was personal. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't asking for confrontation. He was asking for her. And that request did something dangerous. It reframed everything. Was this a final attempt at reconciliation? A chance to challenge her narrative? A moment of vulnerability? No one knew. But it made one thing clear. Whatever Nick wanted to say, he wanted her to hear it. And that put Romy in an impossible position. If she went, she risked hearing something she wasn't ready for. If she didn't, she risked carrying unanswered questions forever. This is where the story stops being about right and wrong. It becomes about cost. According to one source, Romy asked for time, minutes, not hours. She stepped aside again. And in that moment alone, she reportedly broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. The kind of breakdown that happens when the body finally processes what the mind has been holding at bay. Because this wasn't just about Nick. It was about her parents, about how they would have handled this, about what they would have wanted, and about the terrible irony that they weren't there to guide anyone through it. Their absence hovered over every decision. According to insiders, Romy eventually returned with an answer, but it came with conditions. She would go, but not alone. She would listen, but not argue. She would not revisit the past unless Nick brought it up himself. Those conditions mattered, because they reveal intent. She wasn't going in to accuse. She wasn't going in to absolve. She was going in to witness. And witnessing is one of the hardest roles to play. As arrangements were finalized, Romy reportedly learned another detail that shook her. Nick's condition had fluctuated again. Moments of lucidity. Moments of confusion. Which raised another terrifying possibility. What if he said something, and then forgot he said it? What if his words came out fragmented, incomplete, contradictory? What if the message he wanted to deliver didn't land the way he intended? Those thoughts haunted her. Because fragments are dangerous. Fragments get misinterpreted. And misinterpretation had already destroyed so much. Still, she didn't back out. According to people close to the family, Romy prepared herself the only way she knew how, by letting go of expectations. No answers promised. No apologies guaranteed. No resolution assured. Just presence. As the time approached, the family gathered quietly. No arguments now. No debates. Just the heavy awareness that something irreversible was about to happen. Romy stood apart for a moment, absorbing the reality of where they were headed. Inside those walls, under supervision, with time measured in minutes, not emotions. And as they prepared to move, a final complication emerged. Medical staff reportedly warned that Nick might not be able to speak much, if at all. If that happened, everything would change. Because then, this wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a confrontation with silence. And silence has a way of saying more than words ever could. As Romy took her place, one thought reportedly crossed her mind. A thought she hadn't allowed herself to have until now. What if the truth was more complicated than anyone wanted to admit? What if no one was entirely right? What if everyone was carrying only a piece? That thought didn't comfort her. It terrified her. Because complexity offers no villains. No heroes. No clean endings. Just people. And people make mistakes. As the group was finally escorted forward, Romy took one last breath. Not to steady herself, but to accept whatever came next. Because once that door opened, there would be no taking it back. And what happened inside that room, whether spoken or left unsaid, would redefine everything that followed. What if the most powerful statement in the room is the one that never gets said? Because as Romy prepared to step into that controlled, time-limited space, there was another presence shaping everything from the shadows. Tracy Reiner. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't rushed the process. She hadn't demanded access or issued a single public word. And yet, her silence had become its own force. In moments like this, people expect drama, tears, arguments, explosions of emotion. But what they often underestimate is how devastating restraint can be. Because restraint isn't emptiness. It's pressure. And pressure, when it's held long enough, reshapes everything around it. According to people close to the family, Tracy's reaction to the updates was outwardly minimal. No visible collapse. No public display of anguish. She listened. She nodded. She asked clarifying questions, practical ones. Timelines. Approvals. Conditions. That composure unsettled people. Not because it was cold, but because it was unreadable. Was she protecting herself? Protecting someone else? Or protecting the future? Those questions lingered. Because Tracy's role in this family story had always been complicated. She was present, but careful. Involved, but measured. Close enough to feel everything. Distant enough to survive it. And now, as the possibility of a final goodbye approached, her silence felt deliberate. According to insiders, Tracy had been advised, formally or informally, to say as little as possible. Not because she had something to hide, but because words can become liabilities. Especially in cases that remain unresolved. Every sentence can be twisted. Every emotion misread. Every reaction framed as evidence. So Tracy did what many people do when the stakes are this high. She said nothing. But silence doesn't mean disengagement. Behind that quiet exterior, sources say, Tracy was calculating risks. Not legal risks, emotional ones. What would it cost her to go into that room? What would it cost her not to? Because both options carried weight. If she went, she risked reopening wounds she had sealed for months. Risked hearing something she couldn't unhear. Risked being pulled into a narrative she had carefully avoided. If she didn't go, she risked regret. The kind that doesn't fade with time, only sharpens. And unlike Romy, Tracy hadn't made public declarations. She hadn't placed herself on one side of the story or the other. Her power came from neutrality. And neutrality is fragile. Once you step into a moment like this, neutrality disappears. According to one source, Tracy asked a question early on that revealed her internal conflict. If I go in, am I helping him or helping the story? That question cut through everything. Because it acknowledged something uncomfortable. Moments of crisis don't exist in isolation. They become part of a record, a memory, a version of events that others will later interpret. And Tracy understood something many people don't. That sometimes, being present isn't about love. It's about consequence. As discussions continued, it became increasingly clear that Tracy's decision would influence others. Not explicitly, but emotionally. If Tracy went, it signaled unity. If she stayed back, it signaled boundaries. Both messages would be read loudly, whether she intended them or not. And that's the trap of silence. People project meaning onto it whether you consent or not. According to insiders, Tracy remained undecided longer than anyone else. She didn't rush. She didn't seek reassurance. She waited. And waiting, in a situation where time is slipping away, is its own kind of statement. As Romy finalized her conditions for visitation, Tracy was asked directly whether she would accompany her. The question wasn't accusatory. It wasn't emotional. It was logistical. And Tracy didn't answer right away. That pause mattered. Because it suggested hesitation, not fear, but calculation. According to sources, Tracy asked for additional information before deciding. Not about Nick's past. Not about the case. About his present condition. Was he conscious? Was he oriented? Was he able to engage without agitation? Those questions weren't clinical. They were protective. Protective of him and of herself. Because if Nick wasn't fully present, the visit could become something else entirely. A one-sided moment. She would remain outside, not as avoidance, as support. This decision, according to insiders, was intentional. By staying back, Tracy could anchor the aftermath. She could be present for Romy when she came out, whatever state she came out in. And that choice reveals something crucial. Tracy wasn't thinking about the moment. She was thinking about what comes after. Because aftermath is where damage often deepens. People collapse after holding themselves together. Anger surfaces once shock fades. Regret arrives when adrenaline disappears. And Tracy positioned herself there. As the group prepared to move, her role became clear. She wasn't the witness. She was the container. The person who would absorb whatever emotional fallout emerged. And that role, while invisible, is exhausting. According to people close to the family, Tracy's calm began to crack only once. Not in front of others. Not in the room. But alone. A brief moment. A private release. The kind that happens when no one is watching. Because even the strongest silencers need a place to put the weight. As Romy and others were escorted forward, Tracy stayed behind, watching the door close. That image mattered. Because it symbolized something larger. Not distance. Not indifference. Boundaries. And boundaries, in families like this, are often the only thing keeping people functional. As minutes stretched into an agonizing wait, Tracy remained focused. She monitored the time. She kept track of updates. She prepared herself for what might come next. Because whether Nick survived or not, this visit would change everyone. And someone needed to be steady when that change arrived. According to insiders, as the visitation progressed, Tracy received a brief update. Not about what was said, about how long it might last. That update carried urgency, shorter than expected, which meant one thing. Whatever was happening inside that room was unfolding fast. And Tracy understood the implication immediately. If the visit ended abruptly, the emotional shock could be severe. She prepared herself. And then, just as the minutes approached their end, another message came through. This one wasn't clinical. It wasn't procedural. It was emotional. Nick, according to staff, had reacted strongly to something. Not physically violent. Not medically catastrophic. Emotionally, that reaction changed the tone of everything. Because it suggested that something had been said, or was about to be. Something that cut through sedation and exhaustion. Something that mattered. And Tracy, standing outside that door, felt the ground shift beneath her. Because she realized something all at once. Silence may protect you, but it doesn't shield you from consequence. Whatever was happening inside, whatever was being said or left unsaid, was about to spill outward, and she would be the first one to face it. What does distance really mean when time runs out? Because while Romy stepped forward and Tracy held the line outside the door, there was one presence still defined more by absence than action. Jake Reiner. For months, his name had been spoken quietly, carefully, often with a pause afterward, as if people weren't sure how to place him in the story anymore. Not the accuser, not the accused, not the spokesperson, just the brother who stayed away. And now, as the moment everyone feared finally arrived, that distance took on a new meaning. Because staying away is one thing when there's time. It's something else entirely when there isn't. According to people close to the family, Jake received the initial call later than the others. Not because he wasn't important, but because he wasn't nearby. Not physically, not emotionally. When the message reached him, it didn't come with drama. It came with facts. Nick had been critically injured. The situation was unstable. Decisions were being made quickly. And in that moment, Jake reportedly felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Helplessness. Because distance gives you the illusion of safety. It convinces you that by stepping back, you can avoid the worst of what's happening. But crisis doesn't respect boundaries. It finds you anyway. According to insiders, Jake's first reaction wasn't panic. It was disbelief. Not about the incident, but about timing. Why now? Why this way? Why when nothing had even begun to settle? That reaction matters. Because it suggests something deeper. That for Jake, This wasn't just another escalation. It was a rupture in a fragile equilibrium he had built by staying removed. For months, Jake had kept his life compartmentalized. Family tragedy in one box, personal survival in another, public noise somewhere far away. And now those boxes were collapsing into each other. According to one source, Jake asked a question that revealed more than he intended. Is he conscious? That wasn't a question about guilt, or justice, or closure. It was about recognition. Would Nick know he was there, if he chose to go? That question haunted him, because unlike Romy, Jake hadn't spoken publicly. He hadn't drawn lines. He hadn't issued warnings or defended anyone. His distance had protected him from scrutiny, but it had also left him undefined. And now, definition was unavoidable. As Jake processed the information, he was reportedly briefed on the visitation window, the conditions, the limitations, and one detail stood out: time. There wouldn't be enough of it. That realization triggered something unexpected. Guilt. Not guilt over what happened, but guilt over absence. Because absence, when time runs out, becomes a statement whether you intended it or not. If Jake didn't show up now, people would read meaning into that choice. Not just the public, the family, Nick, and that possibility weighed heavily. According to sources, Jake wrestled with a question he hadn't allowed himself to ask until that moment. Had staying away been easier than being present? That's a dangerous question, because once you ask it, you can't unask it. As updates continued to come in, Jake learned about Romy's decision to go, under conditions, about Tracy's choice to stay back and support, and suddenly, his own position felt exposed. He was the only one who hadn't decided anything yet. That realization didn't come with judgment from others. It came from within. According to people close to him, Jake began replaying his last interactions with Nick. Not the dramatic ones, the ordinary ones. The missed calls, the messages left unanswered, the conversations postponed because they felt too heavy. Those moments, once insignificant, now felt monumental. Because if Nick didn't survive, those would be the final memories. And memory is unforgiving. It doesn't soften just because time passes. It sharpens. As the night wore on, Jake reportedly considered traveling immediately. But logistics complicated everything. Distance, approvals, timing. And underneath all of that was something harder to admit. Fear. Not fear of Nick. Fear of what might be said. Because when someone is facing the end, they don't always soften. Sometimes they get honest. And honesty can hurt more than silence. According to one source, Jake worried about being blamed. Not publicly, privately, for staying away, for not choosing sides, for choosing distance over engagement. That fear wasn't irrational. Families under trauma often look for someone to hold accountable, even if it's just emotionally. And Jake had made himself an easy target. As decisions solidified, Jake was informed that he could be included in a later visitation, if Nick's condition allowed. That conditional phrasing mattered. If. It suggested there might not be a later. And suddenly, delay felt like a gamble. According to insiders, Jake reached out, not to officials, but to family. Quietly, he asked Tracy how Romy was holding up. That choice reveals something important. Jake wasn't trying to insert himself into the moment. He was trying to understand its emotional temperature. Tracy's response, according to sources, was measured. She's doing what she needs to do. No reassurance. No alarm. Just acknowledgement. That response landed heavily, because it implied strength, but also strain. And it made Jake question his own restraint. As minutes passed, Jake was told that the visitation had begun. The door had closed. And for the first time, Jake felt truly outside the story. Not by design, by circumstance. That realization triggered a wave of conflicting emotions. Relief, shame, resentment, longing. Relief that he wasn't in the room, facing whatever was happening. Shame that he wasn't strong enough to be there. Resentment that circumstances had forced this choice. Longing for a moment that might already be slipping away. This is the paradox of distance. It protects you from impact, until it doesn't. As Jake waited, updates were scarce. He wasn't told what was being said. He wasn't told how Nick was reacting. He was simply told that the visit was ongoing, and that the situation remained unstable. That vagueness was agonizing, because it left too much room for imagination. Was Nick asking for him? Was Nick angry? Was Nick silent? Jake didn't know. And not knowing is sometimes worse than knowing the worst. According to people close to Jake, he considered one final option, reaching out directly. Not to Nick, that wasn't possible, but to someone who might be able to carry a message. A message that said something simple. I'm thinking of you. But even that felt complicated, because messages get interpreted. And in moments like this, interpretation can distort intent. What if it sounded too little, too late? What if it sounded performative? What if it reopened wounds instead of offering comfort? Jake hesitated. And hesitation, in this context, had consequences. As the visitation window neared its end, Jake received a brief update. Not about words. About time. The visit might end sooner than planned. That update hit like a blow, because it suggested that whatever was happening inside the room was intense, and intensity doesn't leave space for second chances. At that moment, Jake reportedly felt a shift. Not urgency. Resolve. According to insiders, he made a decision. Not about whether to go, but about what he would do next, no matter the outcome. If Nick survived, Jake would stop staying away. If Nick didn't, Jake would carry that absence as a reminder, not an excuse. That internal commitment mattered, because it marked the end of distance as a coping strategy and the beginning of accountability. As Jake processed that resolve, another message came through. This one was brief. Romy would be coming out soon. Jake's heart reportedly dropped, because that meant the visit was ending. And whatever happened inside that room had already happened. There would be no do-overs, no second passes, no revisions. Jake prepared himself for what might follow. Not the facts, the fallout. Because Romy would emerge changed, one way or another. And Tracy would be there to catch whatever came with her. But Jake would be hearing it secondhand. Filtered, interpreted, incomplete. And that incompleteness would follow him forever. As he waited, Jake found himself asking a question he hadn't dared to voice before. What if staying away had cost him the chance to say goodbye? Not in a dramatic sense. In a human one. That question sat heavy, because it didn't accuse anyone else. It pointed inward. And then, just as Jake was bracing himself for whatever news was coming, he received a message that froze him in place. Not from family, from someone connected to the institution. The message was simple. Nick had reacted strongly to something said during the visit, and the medical team was reassessing his condition. That message changed everything, because it meant the visit hadn't been neutral. It had mattered. Something had been said that reached him. Something that cut through exhaustion, sedation, and pain. And Jake realized, all at once, that whatever that something was, he would never hear it the same way as those who were there. And that realization hurt more than distance ever had. Because being outside the room meant being outside the truth. And what came next would make that divide impossible to ignore. What happens when a man realizes the story may end before he can finish telling it? Because inside that medical unit, time didn't move the way it does on the outside. Minutes stretched. Sounds dulled. Light felt harsher. And every breath carried more meaning than it should. Nick Reiner was still alive. That fact alone mattered more than anything else in that moment. But according to people familiar with the situation, his condition was shifting. Not steadily. Not predictably. It rose and fell like a tide no one could chart with confidence. And when the body becomes unstable, the mind often does something unexpected. It sharpens. Not in a calm, reflective way. In a raw, urgent way. Sources suggest that Nick's awareness came in waves. Brief windows where he seemed present. Moments where his eyes focused. Moments where he appeared to recognize voices, even if he couldn't always respond the way people expected. Those moments were precious. Because they were rare. And because everyone understood what they might represent. The last chance to be heard. According to insiders, Nick didn't ask for legal counsel. He didn't ask for doctors to explain procedures. He didn't ask for reassurances. He asked questions that had nothing to do with medicine. Who's here? Who knows? Did she come? Those questions reveal more than any statement ever could. They suggest awareness of consequence, awareness of absence, awareness of narrative. Nick wasn't just fighting pain. He was fighting erasure. Because when someone's story is already being told without them, the fear isn't death. It's being misunderstood. According to one source, Nick became visibly emotional when he learned who had agreed to come and who hadn't. Not angry, not explosive, quietly affected. That reaction mattered, because it contradicted the image many people had formed of him. Not defiant, not dismissive, human. And humanity complicates everything. As the visitation unfolded, those present reportedly noticed a shift in Nick's demeanor. Not sudden, gradual. At first, there was tension, guarded energy, a sense of measuring words before releasing them. But then, something softened. It's unclear exactly what triggered that shift. It may have been recognition. It may have been exhaustion. It may have been the simple realization that time was no longer a resource to manage. It was a debt coming due. According to sources, Nick attempted to speak about the past, but not in the way people expected. Not defensively, not as a confession, not as a denial. More like fragments. Memories that surfaced without structure. A moment here, a feeling there, a sentence that trailed off before it could land. That kind of communication is unsettling, because fragments don't resolve anything. They raise more questions. And when someone is fragile, people listen differently. They lean in. They try to connect dots that may not connect. That's dangerous, because in moments like this, listeners can hear what they need to hear, not necessarily what's being said. According to insiders, Nick expressed something that sounded like regret, but not regret in the way headlines love. Not, "I'm sorry for everything." More like, "I wish things had gone differently." That distinction matters, because regret doesn't always mean guilt. Sometimes it means exhaustion with the outcome. Sometimes it means grief for what could have been. And sometimes it means awareness that choices, made or unmade, have consequences you never anticipated. Those present reportedly struggled to interpret what Nick was trying to convey. Was he acknowledging mistakes? Was he lamenting misunderstanding? Was he simply overwhelmed? The answer may be all three. What's clear is that his emotional state was volatile. One moment subdued, the next strained. At times, visibly frustrated by his own physical limitations. Imagine knowing what you want to say and being trapped in a body that won't cooperate. That frustration can turn inward quickly. According to one source, Nick became agitated when he realized the visit was time-limited, that there would be no long conversation, no chance to circle back. That awareness intensified his urgency. Words came faster, less filtered, and that's when the emotional temperature spiked. Not because of accusations, because of vulnerability. Nick reportedly expressed fear. Not fear of pain, fear of being reduced to a headline, fear of being remembered only for the worst interpretation of events. That fear is deeply human, and it reframes everything, because people often assume that someone facing the end will seek forgiveness. But sometimes, they seek context. They want to be understood, even if they can't be exonerated. According to sources, Nick made at least one statement that stunned those present. Not because of what it revealed, because of what it didn't. He didn't attack anyone. He didn't lash out. He didn't accuse his family of betrayal. Instead, he reportedly said something that suggested resignation. Like someone who knows the tide has already turned. Resignation can look like calm, but it's not peace. It's surrender to inevitability. As the visit continued, medical staff reportedly intervened more frequently, monitoring vitals, adjusting medication, keeping a close watch. Those interventions mattered, because they reminded everyone in the room that this wasn't just an emotional moment. It was a medical one. Nick's body was under strain, and emotional stress, even without raised voices, can accelerate decline. According to insiders, there was a moment when the conversation stopped entirely, not because of conflict, because Nick couldn't continue. That pause was heavy. No one knew whether it would be temporary or final. During that silence, the weight of everything that hadn't been said pressed down on the room. And this is where perception diverges. Some present interpreted Nick's silence as exhaustion. Others interpreted it as contemplation. Still others feared it meant something worse. Because when someone goes quiet at the edge, the mind fills the gap with fear. According to one source, Nick regained enough awareness to make one final request during the visit. Not for water, not for medication, for time, just a little more. That request reportedly couldn't be fully granted. Protocols, medical judgment, safety considerations, and that denial, however necessary, landed hard. Because it underscored the reality no one wanted to accept. This wasn't a conversation that could continue indefinitely. It was ending, whether anyone was ready or not. As the visit drew to a close, those present were forced to make choices. What do you say when you don't know if there will be another chance? Do you summarize years of pain in a sentence? Do you offer comfort you're not sure you believe? Do you stay silent and let presence speak? According to sources, The ending was understated. No dramatic declarations. No final speeches. Just acknowledgement. A look. A touch. A pause that carried more than words ever could. And then the door opened. Medical staff stepped in. The visit was over. What happened next is where accounts begin to diverge. Some say Nick appeared calmer afterward. Others say his condition worsened rapidly. Some suggest the emotional exertion took a toll. Others believe the visit